Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sunday Sound Design. Today we are talking about EQ8. We're continuing our series here on Sunday Sound Design where we're walking through the audio effects in Ableton Live. We're walking through every single audio effect in Ableton Live. And the goal is to talk about the interface, to talk about what it does, how to use it as a sound design tool, and just have fun in about 20 minutes or less. Today, we are talking about EQ8. Now, if you are familiar with Ableton Live, if you've used Live before, don't tune this episode out. Don't think, oh, I've got my fancy plugins of modeled EQs, classic modeled EQs, so I don't ever use channel EQ, EQ8, EQ3 in Live. Don't bypass these plugins because they're incredible devices. They're very useful. And again, today we're talking about EQ8. So let's dive into it. Enough talking. First, let's start out how we often do. Let's talk about how to get to our audio effects in Ableton Live. So you can click your Show Hide button in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, then go down to Audio Effects. And this is not going to show you your plugins. When I'm in Audio Effects here, I'm not seeing plugins. I'm seeing audio effects installed in my version of Live. And that's going to change based on whether you're on Intro, Standard, or Suite, whether you have Max for Live, those sorts of things. But these are the plugins I have. Now, your screen may look a little different than mine. Yours may look like this. This is a helpful feature, particularly if you're getting started or coming from another software and you don't necessarily know what the drives in Ableton are labeled as. You can go to the drive folder here to find all your drives, which is great. I particularly don't like this view, so I right click here and disable group in folder. And you could do that no matter how many levels deep into a folder you are. So I suggest disabling group in folder unless you're brand new to Live or brand new with just DAWs and recording. You may want to leave that on in this place. So now let's go find EQ8. To load this in, I could click and drag this onto this track and that'll load. If I have this track selected, I could double click and load it onto the track. Just some fast ways to get it there. If you're looking at presets, which today we're just going to look at the default device, but if you want to look at the presets in EQ8, you can click the arrow to the left of that and you could see how they're grouped together based on different instruments, type of instrument, context, all sorts of different things, which is great. So now here's what I've got pulled up for today. This is just a great kind of fun loop here that makes me want to go write a really fancy, nice pop song. But we're going to use this with EQ8 and see if we can have some fun with it. Okay, so I'm going to double click to load this in. Again, we're going to be working with the just default device here. We're not going to be doing any presets at this time, but presets are a really great way to get access to the plugin. First thing I want to show you, we're going to stay mainly in this view, but one of the things that could be helpful, let me close our browser here. When working with EQ8 is you could click this unfold button and it's going to toggle your view that we had there above your EQ8. So I like that EQ8 includes kind of our view here to where you could see the frequency of our track. So let's press play. You could see kind of how our track is responding there, but I could choose to move this up here and then I can adjust my bands down here, which is great. So kind of up to you, however you want that to be set and however you want to see that. But I prefer kind of this default view here. At the most basic level, I think it's important to understand there's 8 different bands of EQ that we could use. We could enable all of these. You can see it starts to get kind of crowded. And within each of these little EQ, I guess they're filters because that's essentially what a band is a filter. We have different types of filters that we could choose. So you could go through here and see all the different ones. And if you want to, as a pro tip, hover your mouse right here, look over to the left in info view, and it will walk you through each of these. So typically what you may want to do on one is to have your low cut here. Or you could do just your normal low cut here. Maybe you have a high cut here based on the type of content you have. What's great about EQ8, again, I talked about it being a sound design tool. Your EQ8 could essentially function as a filter, right? So let's turn everything off here, each one of these bands off. And I'm just turning these off by clicking these numbers. And then let's just at the most basic level, make this a low pass or high cut filter. Okay, so what I did is turned all those bands off. I just have our 8th band on. And if you look right here, we chose a high cut or low pass, right? And let's play this. What I'm doing is I'm just moving this band. I'm actually clicking on the number and I'm moving this. And what's happening with that is it's moving this frequency of that band. Okay, so because I have a low pass or high cut, that means I'm cutting the highs. I'm allowing the lows to pass through. And as I click it, drag this moves my frequency. As I go up, it adjusts the Q, which the Q just boosts the point in which we're cutting, right? Or boosting. And then I could drag down like this if I wanted. So maybe the first way to kind of understand, and probably what would be beneficial as a sound design tool, understanding these different modes, low pass, high pass, band, notch, all those sorts of things. Maybe just kill all of your bands except for one. Maybe start with one instead of doing what I did all the way to 8. But you could choose, okay, so here's the opposite of what we had. This would be a high pass, right? Only the highs are passing through. Then we could go to this guy, which was this one, low shelf. All right, so as we change this, all right, we can go this way. We leave our highs there, but cut our lows. We can go this way. Get some creative things. We have gain on this one as well as Q to boost on either end of that. Again, just kind of go through this. This is band pass, so only the certain band passes, or we could cut. We have notch in here, which is kind of the opposite of band pass, where we just find a certain frequency and notch it out. This to me is a very helpful like corrective tool to listen to a drum set, for instance, and go, okay, where's that issue I'm hearing? And I could go as wide with the cut as I want to, or as narrow as I want with the cut there. And note also, I'm clicking and dragging. This is just how I'm used to using this. You could also go and move frequency around here and adjust Q, again, kind of up or down based on that. But what I would suggest is go through all these different filter types and listen to how they affect the sound, like as you move them. This will be helpful to learn the difference between low pass and high pass and notch and band and all that sort of stuff. Just go through and listen to these kind of with maybe one band, just kind of set as you're playing, play through things, move it, listen to it, understand how it affects the sound. And again, EQ8 is just 8 sets of filters. We could choose the filter type where we're filtering out EQs or adding things in. And so it's essentially a filter at its most basic level, which is great. So let's turn 8 back off. Let's turn 1 on. So essentially what we do, we could turn these on or off. We could choose what type of filter we want. Based on the one we have, gives us a little more control. So we have frequency, we have Q, which kind of boost at the point of cutting, or the point of wherever the frequency is. On some of them, we have frequency where we say, where do we want this in the spectrum? How much do we want to gain it? And then how tight or how narrow or wide do we want that? The bandwidth of that to be, that cut, right? So if I go up, I'm boosting. If I go down, I'm cutting. So probably the most useful one here, let's see, what is this? This would be low cut. I guess that's called bell. That's what we're calling that. Yeah, because it's not necessarily notch. That would be notch. So the bell is probably the most useful because we can boost, we can cut, we can make it super narrow, we can make it super wide if we want to. So this is probably a little more traditional EQ. Like when I'm thinking of being at an audio console and EQing things, this is the curve I'm typically used to working with. But again, on the low end, you probably want a low cut, high pass. And on the top end, you may want a high cut, low pass. We'll talk about that, particularly channel EQ, EQ3. We'll talk maybe a little more about that next week. So this is kind of the basic of our filter. Let's walk through and see what else we have here to talk about. So we have our 8 different modes. We could choose kind of our filter type. We can enable these based on kind of how we're working. Again, adjust these independently too. I guess that's worth stressing. So you can see 1 is not moving while I'm adjusting frequency. And to choose a specific band to work with, I'm selecting 1, right, and not moving 2, which is great. So that's kind of the basics here, working left to right. Now, if we go over to the right here, a really nice feature. One, we could turn off this preview. I don't know why you would do that, maybe CPU usage, but if you're distracted by seeing that preview, you could turn that off. If you want to hear just what a specific band is doing, it's kind of like a solo in place thing, which is kind of nice. You can enable this preview button here and then click on that band, and that's going to let you hear just what that particular band is hearing. It's like, that's really boosting low end. I might say that's too much, so we'll notch it down. Or we might go, okay, I don't particularly like the sound of that, so we'll cut that, right? And that lets me kind of hear that and solo that particular band in place. And all I'm doing is just enabled that and then just clicking here. Okay. And that's going to let me hear that, which is great. There's, I believe, 3 different modes that the EQ operates in. I am not fancy pants, so I typically have always, I guess there's probably times when I did The only time I could think of that I changed this mode. Well, let's talk about the modes, and I'll talk about the time I changed. So there's 3 modes: stereo, left, right, and then mid side. I've never recorded anything using the mid side method, but that's a possibility. Left, right lets you adjust EQ separately from on the left side than the right side. The only time I've done that was when I was sampling a grand piano and I had some samples, and I had stereo mics and the left side needed a little more work than the right side, or vice versa. I would go in and select that. Important to know, when you select left, right, you then have this edit button that lets me say, am I editing the left or am I editing the right? But you see visually, the interface gives you a really good kind of visual indication. This gray line back here is what's happening on the left-hand side. This yellow line is whatever's active. So this is right. And then if I swap it, left is this blue light, and then gray back behind there is right, which is really, really great. Mid-side, if you're fancy enough to know what that is and record in mid-side, then you can adjust to EQ the mid or to EQ just the side there, which is great. So again, you get independent control of those, which is good. Adaptive Cue. I've never disabled this, but let's go over to Info View, which again is over here. I'm just putting my mouse here and we'll read what this says. Adaptive Cue says, with Adaptive Cue enabled, the cue amount increases, becomes more narrow as the amount of boost or cut increases. This results in a more consistent output volume and is based on the behavior of classic analog EQ. Just leave it turned on. If you want to experiment with it and turn it off, you could, but I would leave it on. Scales the amount of gain change applied to all active filters. Now, this has no effect on low cut, high cut, or notch filters. So there you go. If that means something to you, try that. And then finally, gain. Slider boost or attenuates EQ8's overall output by up to 12 dB. So this would be just taking our drum sound here with our EQ and just adding gain to that. Now be careful. You start to get lost if you add gain in a lot of different places in your chain. But this is super, super helpful as a way to kind of access stuff and change things. So again, I would say best thing with EQ8, maybe experiment with moving the spectrum up here. You might like that. You might find that interesting. I guess one thing that is helpful is it does tell you, okay, this is, if I click this, it's going to tell me over here information about it, what note it is, if we're thinking in terms of notes as opposed to frequencies, what hertz, and then minus dB, or in this case, a boost, which is kind of helpful. But experiment with that. I guess you could change what your analyzer is set to, how wide or simple it is, the refresh rate for this. This is all stuff that's above my pay grade and starts to get into like smart. If you know smart for like live metering of a room, that's stuff that is beyond my pay grade and things that I do. But EQ8 is super helpful. Let me share one final thing, because this is Sunday Sound Design. We do talk a lot about sound design on the show. Let's find and I didn't plan on this, but let's find just a clip here of like a keys thing. There we go. Okay, so we'll drop this in. That was pretty easy. I think I've used a clip like this before, actually, but we'll drop this in. One of my favorite things to do when working with an EQ, again, both, we could kind of treat this as corrective, we could treat it as a sound design tool, is to play a sound and just listen. So let's just play and listen for a second. Oh, let me actually trigger the clip. That would help. Okay, and what I'm listening for, are there any problems? Are there any frequencies that stick out to me? And my ear is pretty good, but when it comes to finding specific frequencies, I haven't done it enough as a front of house audio engineer. I was only a front of house audio engineer for like 2 years, pretty consistently. So I haven't done it enough to know exactly what frequency to go to. I could get close, but here's a tip that I often do, is I'll take a band here. Okay, and let's particularly take one of these guys that's set to bell in the middle. Something about this mid-range I don't love. So what I'll do is I'll take this and I'll actually increase it to boost it, really attenuate and like really boost this. And I'll go, you know, in this case, this sample isn't bad, but I go, yeah, that something just doesn't sound right about that. I don't like that frequency. So I exaggerate it to find the frequency. And then here's what I do. I cut it. So I could just click and drag down, or I could take my gain and just drag down. Now that's pretty drastic cut. Okay. Which actually, I kind of like that based on the context of what I'm doing. That may work. So I could increase this if I don't want to cut it as much. And then if I don't want the cut to be as wide, if I want it a little more narrow, like this really is my problem, I could take my cue and tighten it up a little. So now I'm really hearing, like, getting really specific. Again, nothing really sounds bad to me on this. And this is maybe a little too specific for my taste, but okay, great. Sounds a little muddy, so I'm going to just decrease that. Right. And that's a really helpful tool for me, particularly when working with drums, to have a snare drum to try to get it to sound like a snare, like an acoustic kit or kick or something like that. I'll often do that to increase the band, to find the problem frequency, really exaggerate it, and then I'll drop the gain to cut it. So that's a look at EQ8. Really simple, really straightforward. Don't give up on EQs in Ableton Live. They're really great. They're simple to use. The visuals make them really easy to use. You have access to them directly in Ableton Live. You don't have to use a plugin. You can layer them and stack them and do different things. So next week, we're going to take a look at EQ3. Here on the channel, which will be a shorter video. We're about 15 minutes out on this one. This will be a little shorter, but we'll talk about how to maybe use EQ3 versus EQ8 as well too. But to see that, you've got to hit subscribe, and to see the rest of Sunday Sound Design as we continue the series, you got to hit subscribe here on YouTube and press the bell icon so you're notified when we go live. Every Sunday, 10 a.m. Central, I post a brand new episode, and then every other day of the week, I post a brand new tutorial, 10 a.m. Central. You don't want to miss it, so make sure you hit subscribe on YouTube, hit the bell icon, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. Bye.